Good evening, everybody. This is Alan Adams. I'm going to try to conclude this evening our lecture series leading up to the second quiz for badge number 3, the advanced, the proficient level of our Excel program. And I'm going to try to conclude our discussion on pivot tables. Now, I have been asked to do a quick review, so I'm going to pick up from where we left off in a few moments. But what I want to do to show you especially how easy it is I'm going to reconstruct the pivot table that we left off with. As you'll remember, as you can see up here on the screen, right up here to my right and to your left, there's some data. And you can see this is the same data we worked with before, except that I added one set of data in column G, division, and I differentiated some of our customers from having an east or a west division. The reason for that is because that will help me conclude my discussion about pivot tables later on. Okay, so the very first thing that I'm going to do is, again, because pivot tables have so much to do with data management and reporting and presentation, is I'm going to recreate our pivot table. You can see down in my tabs on the lower left of the Excel screen that is the table we dealt with the other day. And then, of course, the tab with data is the raw information you see right here. I'm going to highlight it all, and I'm going to put it into an ordinary table, not a pivot table, but an ordinary table, and we do that by first highlighting it. Then I come up to the ribbon. The second command, the second tab is Insert. I left click on that, as you'll recall. And the third icon over on the ribbon is now Table. I'm going to click on that. Create Table is the prompt it's giving me. I click on OK. And now everything is in an ordinary table for our ease of use. As you'll remember, putting data in a table makes it easier to add more records later on and refresh existing objects like pivot tables that could update, or charts maybe, based on this data. So just to make it look a little bit easier to read, I'm also going to change the color. Look on the ribbon and go way over to the right. You'll see I'm going to choose orange. I kind of like orange because I always use blue as my font, and the orange contrasts with it nicely. I've now created my table. All right, what I'm going to do now, and I'm going to delete that little comment, this data is not in the table because that would make me a liar if I'll put it in the table. Okay, so now what I want to do is I want to take that data and I want to make it a fresh pivot table, one that's going to include this new column G, so I can sort or filter by east and west. Those words, sort and filter, we've seen several ways to do that in this course series so far. Okay, way at the top of the ribbon, for example, rightmost you see sort and filter. We can also do it from column headings. Okay, so I'm going to show you a new method built right into the pivot table in a little while. So the first thing I'm going to do is create a new pivot table. You'll recall from our previous lecture that you click on Insert in the ribbon. Okay, and I'm going to click on the leftmost icon that says Pivot Table. Okay, it gives me this prompt that says select a table or range. Okay, I'm going to cancel out of that because you know what? I forgot to highlight it. So I'm going to select this table. Okay, I'm going to repeat my last couple of steps. I should have highlighted that before. I insert, I click on Pivot Table. There it is. Now this table has been identified automatically by Excel as table number 1. I'm just going to accept it. And it wants to know if I want to keep it. Look down below, choose where to place the pivot table. New worksheet. I always like to go for a new worksheet. So down on the lower left of this entire Excel spreadsheet where it says Pivot and Data, we're going to create a brand new tab by just leaving that New Worksheet button checked. I'm going to click on OK in this Create Pivot Table prompt that it's giving me. Okay. All right, very good. So it's ready to accept the pivot table. Now remember, I'm recreating everything we had on the previous tab. I just want to demonstrate and repeat for you really how easy it is. Okay, I'm going to click on Customer and Seller. Okay, now Excel once again is assuming where I want to put these things, and sometimes they're good assumptions, sometimes they are not. So in the rows, I do want Customer. Look in the squares down here in this little pivot table builder. It sees that or thinks I should say, that it wants me to count the sellers. I do not. I want them to be headers in the rows as well. So I'm going to click on that, left click, drag over, hold down that button, drag it over to rows, and drop it right there. Okay? Now you can see what's happening. Our pivot table is starting to flesh out. Okay, now I don't want customer as my primary. I want seller as my primary to sort, and then I want my customer. So I'm just going to drag those down and around, change them up. Okay, now those are the headings that I want. I'll make it bigger for you in a moment. Again, this is all a review. What else do I want? Come back up to the field names here, friends, and I want the amount. I want to total up my sales dollars by each one of these customers and then by each one of the 4 sellers, the representatives that I have. So I'm going to click amount. I'm going to check that box, and it places it in values for me. Excel thinks that they're dollars, they're amounts. It assumes that I want sums of values. Okay, that's a pretty good assumption. This time we're going to let Excel get away with their choice. All right? Okay, very good. Now I want you all to remember, ladies and gentlemen, from our data, I'm clicking on the data tab. Remember, this number, 133,400, is the total amount of all of our sales. Let's use that as a control, okay? Please keep that number in mind. All right. Now you'll notice also that division, I'm clicking back on sheet number 1, the one I just created, and division was not on the original pivot table, on the pivot tab, but it's on the new one, okay, because I created it after I added that division column. Okay, so now what I'd like to do first of all is come down to the lower left. Instead of calling it sheet 1, let's rename that. Let's call it pivot 2. Okay, so I'm going to right click on where it says sheet 1. I want to rename. I take the third choice down. Again, this is all review, right? And I'm going to change that to PIVOT to pivot 2. Okay? All right, very good. What else do I want to do? I'm going to reformat this very quickly for you, just to make it a little easier to read. So I'm going to highlight columns, I don't know, let's call it columns A through E. Okay, you'll remember all your formatting classes now, all the instruction I gave you. I'm going to right click. I'm going to go to column width, and I'm going to make my column width for those first 5 columns, I like 28. That number comes out pretty good usually. And to make my font bigger, I come way up to the ribbon. Okay, near the top where it says Calibri body and then it says font size 12, I'm going to left click on that and change it to 36, make it nice and big for us. Okay, and I'm just going to change my column width by dragging on the A, B, C, D on those column ID letters. I can just click on the right side and drag it to expand it. So this is a nice little review of some of our shortcuts. Now you'll notice that my little pivot table builder has disappeared. Remember to call that handy little tool back up. You left click anywhere within the pivot table, it reappears. Okay, so there are our 4 squares. Okay, now so far, up until now, this was a review. Now what we're going to do is we're going to add some new information using the 1 square of these 4 squares on the pivot table builder that we have not used yet. Remember, in different versions of Excel, some of these trails, commands might vary. They might call them slightly different things, but they will always be there. These are the fundamentals. Right. So we've used columns, ladies and gentlemen. We've used rows. We've used values. We have not used filters. Okay, so now what I want to do is I want to have the ability to look at east and west. So the first thing I want to do is click on division in my field names at the top of Pivot Table Builder. Okay, once again, Excel says, oh, you must want to put that in values. Well, no, you do not. So down in values where it says count of division, I'm going to take it, I'm going to left click and hold and drag it to the square we have not used yet. Filters, here we go. Okay? Now, when I did that, when I released it, you didn't see anything happen in the pivot table, friends, but what you did see is look up here. You see in this row, it now says division all. That was not there before. By putting that filter there, that's another way that we sort or filter information. Remember, a filter is a condition. A filter says, if something meets this condition, do this, otherwise don't. Or it might say, otherwise do something else. Now, what did I do this for? Because now all of a sudden, remember, you might be in the middle of a presentation and the boss might say, show me only the sales to our east. Now let's remember this grand total, 133,400. Remember, when you are in the pivot table, Two new little tabs appear on the right in the ribbon, Pivot Table Analysis and Design. How did that grand total get there? From a previous lesson I showed you. Click on Design, and it says the second icon from the left, Grand Totals. Click on that. I can turn it off, just like that. Okay? I happen to want it on, so I'm going to turn it back on again by going right back to that same place, Grand Totals. Click on for rows and columns, and there it is. Okay, now I want you to remember that 133,400. That's why I was just playing with it, because we want to make sure that our sales always total up to that. Back to our sorting, our filter, okay? Now look in cell B1. See that little drop-down arrow? That has now appeared there because of our filter. I'm going to click on it, and right now it says Select All. I'm going to turn that off. If I only want to see the East, I click on East. Notice, ladies and gentlemen, it equals $100,400. Okay? So now let's say I want to see the West. I go back to that same little arrow, division, I turn off East, I pick West, and there's 33,000. Okay, the first set of totals for the East division was 100,400. This one is 33,000 even. Add them together and you come back to that wonderful number, 133,400. Okay, so what I've now done is I've given it a condition. So I can do a filtration, I can do a sort, either by East or by West. That is what that upper left square in this pivot table builder is for. When it says filters, now you've seen another way that you can sort or filter data within Excel. Excuse me. Okay, let's see, what else do we want to do? Well, there's one more thing I want to do. You can see that my precious commas aren't there anymore from previous lectures. You know that I love to see commas when I start dealing with larger numbers. I don't want to make the mistake of thinking something is 100,000 when it's only 10,000. How do I reformat just this pivot table? Let's come back to the ribbon, to these two tabs that appear. Okay, now I'm outside the pivot table, they disappear. I click in the pivot table, they reappear. I'm going to click on the tab that says Pivot Table Analysis. Okay. See where it says Field Settings. Okay, I'm going to put my cursor somewhere in column B within the pivot table. Doesn't matter where. And I'm going to click on Field Settings, left click. Okay, in this little field prompt, I'm going to go down to the lower left where it says Number. Okay, I'm going to click on, left click on Number. All right, look familiar? That's the format menu that we've seen so many times already. It can come at us from so many directions. I'm going to click, as you may remember, on Number because I want to change the appearance of my numbers in column B. I am going to take decimal places and drop it down to 0. I don't want to see any pennies. And I'm going to click on that next little box that says Use 1000 Separator. That means put a comma in it if it's greater than 1,000. And I go down to the lower right and left click on OK. And now I left click on OK one more time. Look at that. There are my commas, ladies and gentlemen. It is that easy. Look how quickly this is coming together. Okay? Remember our mantra when it comes to Excel. Experiment and explore. By doing that, you will excel. Pun intended. Okay? So, the final thing, I have a few minutes left as we conclude our discussion on pivot tables, and by the way, there's a lot more power here that I may put into future modules that have no part of the badge you're currently going for. But I'm going to show you one more very, very handy little gadget. Gadgets do indeed fascinate me. Now, once again, you've got this pivot table, you've prepared it, your boss said I want a summary by salesperson, by seller, and then subtotals by company. And you can see that some of our sellers cross over a little bit. Some of them sell to, more than one person rather, might sell to, let's say, Concord. You see Concord a few times, Ibex a few times. And right in the middle of the presentation, your boss says, can you give me a summary of everything just for, say, Concord, the customer known as Concord? Well, of course, by now you realize that you can easily take a moment and say, boss, can you hold on, and ask her to wait, and you redo your pivot table, or you can do a secondary filtration, sortation. Hold it. You really want to look good? If you're giving a presentation, you're standing there probably holding a clicker to advance your slides, back your slides up, use a laser to point at them. You can do something interactive like that with a pivot table as well, and that, ladies and gentlemen, is what we call the slicer. Okay? I want you to look up at the ribbon again, and under pivot table analysis, a couple of icons over, you see one called Insert Slicer. Okay? Let's click on that. And we are creating an interactive tool. You can insert more than one slicer. Okay? Now you're doing this right in front of the boss, and you're doing it in seconds because you are in mid-presentation, and of course time is money, time counts. And the boss wants something for a customer. The slicer is going to allow you to do an interactive sortation, just like using your clicker on a PowerPoint. You're using the slicer on a pivot table. Watch this. Because she's asking about a customer, I'm going to click on customer. Then I click on OK, and look at that. That little object appears there. Like any other object, you can drag on the corners and make it bigger just to make it easier to see. Let's move my builder out of the way. All right, and that essentially is your virtual clicker. Now, she has asked you about Concord, so I'm going to put my cursor on Concord. Watch your pivot table. Look at that. All four of your sellers have sold to Concord. Barry has sold 26.5, Jones 7,500, Lyons 9,800, and Reese 8,000. Isn't that a great tool? You can do that for your other customer, Ibex. Check them out. Okay, Barry and Jones both sold to Ibex, $8,600 and $9,900. Okay, very, very handy tool. I'm just going to delete out of that. I'm inside of that little interactive menu led by customer, the slicer. I'm going to delete it by hitting the delete key on your computer. And let's just do a different one now. I'm going to click back in my pivot table, and I'm going to reinsert my, hang on, let me get out of this, please. There we are. Bear with me. Okay. Now, once again, I'm going to go back to my pivot table. I'm going to click on the tab, Pivot Table Analyze. I'm going to insert slicer, and this time, friends, I'm going to select, how about pot? Let's pick pot, and click on OK. Okay. Let's click on pot number 1039. All right. Ibex and Penton. All right. That pot number has been sold by two different salespersons to those two different customers. All right. That's a nice cross-section in the last several lectures of what the pivot table is and what it can do for you, both in data analysis and in presentation. Please remember, we're looking at about, 17 or 18 different records here. You could be looking at 1,700 records. You could be looking at dozens or hundreds of records. So this tool, I think, has proven its merit to you. Play with the pivot table. It's a wonderful, wonderful tool to have in your personal arsenal of business success. Okay? And that is going to conclude our series on pivot tables. I'm now going to give you the second quiz toward our third badge, proficient level. And my final series of lectures will have to do with more advanced functions. I will start on those soon. Thank you very much for your kind attention, and very best of luck in your Excel studies. Have a nice weekend. Take care.